Hello, everyone. Ever wondered how rich you'd be if you bought property back in BGC back in 2008? Well, today I'm here to help you spot the next BGC, or as real estate investors like to call them, hotspots. All right. Welcome to the third episode of Financial Freedom Philippines. Our mission is to empower Filipinos to build wealth and a brighter future. We are driven by a deep love for the Philippines and a vision of seeing the country and its people flourish. My name is Kane, and joining me today are my amazing co hosts, Georgina and Justin. Say hello.
How's it
All right.
going?
Hello.
And together, we've spent years diving into the world of real estate, finance, and banking. Our goal to equip you with the insights, strategies, and inspiration you need to make smart, informed decisions on your investment journey. So, this series that we're going to be kicking off is a four-part series on the secrets to finding real estate hotspots in the Philippines, or in simpler terms, learning how to spot the next BGC. So, Justin, why don't you tell us what's coming up in this series?
So, what we'll be teaching you in this series is what is a hotspot and how do you define it, how to spot one, market cycles, what is the optimum buying window. And again, we will be discussing all this. So if this is going over the head a little bit, it's okay. We're gonna get through it, right? But it's super important.
Yep.
And we'll also discuss why it might not be the best to buy in a hotspot. And that's an interesting one. And most importantly as well, what makes a hotspot? What are the core drivers or the signs that a location is a hotspot or will become a hotspot? So all that we'll be teaching. In short, this series is focused on the what, not the where. Because if you can learn what moves a market and turns it into a hotspot and the core concepts around the hotspot, then you'll be able to see the next BGC coming a mile away. So there's a great saying, give a man a fish and you feed him it for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So that's what we're trying to teach people is for your whole life after this series, you'll be able to spot the next BGC. And that's amazing, right? By the end of this series, you'll be able to answer 4 critical questions when analyzing if a location will be a good investment opportunity for you. Number 1, is this location a hotspot right now? And if it is, at what stage of hotness is it at? And then also, is the hotness sustainable? And if it's not a hotspot, will it turn into a hotspot? Again, all this will make sense as we're going through. So those are the 4 critical questions.
All right. So, Georgina, why don't you tell us what's going to be in today's episode?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be covering quite a lot. So today we'll introduce some core concepts about hotspots. This is obviously going to be quite a lot to learn. So we're just going to start slow. In this episode, really get your foundational knowledge ready. And then in each following episode, we'll reveal the core drivers behind real estate hotspots. And by the end of this series, you'll be a hotspot detective. You'll be able to spot the next BGC from a mile away. And you'll be really ready to start investing. So for today, like I said, we're just going to cover some core concepts and we're going to dive into the exciting world of real estate investing. So first off, what is a hotspot? What do we mean when we say this place is a hotspot? And it's actually a phrase that you might have heard quite often, where are the hotspots right now? But what does it actually definitively mean? And for us, when we say a hotspot, we mean that it is a market that's going to outperform other markets. And we mean outperform in regards to key metrics like growth, rental yield, and demand. So, for example, hotspots, the big cities, the places where people want to be, the trendy areas, in the Philippines specifically, we're thinking about BGC, particularly back in 2008, 2010, a little bit earlier than probably most of you expect, but it was a rising star in the real estate market. Back then, properties outperformed in price appreciation, buyer activity, sales volumes, and even condominiums were selling so fast, so quickly, which is a very clear sign of a hotspot. So what happens during a hotspot phase? When a market becomes a hotspot, demand skyrockets, buyer
Mhm.
activity increases, transactions surge, sales volumes go through the roof, sellers gain the upper hand. So it's a seller's market as opposed to a buyer's market. And that's about it. So now that you know what exactly we're referring to when we say a hotspot, let's get stuck into the first core concept. Kane?
So there are 4 phases of the real estate cycle. And of course, understanding them is key in order to find the right timing in the market. So, what is the first phase? The first phase is called the recovery phase or the start of the growth. So, what happens in this phase? So, number one, the market is bouncing back from a slowdown, right? And then in this case, the property prices are low and the demand starts to pick up. And the third, investors with foresight, they start buying because they see potential in this space. So what are the signs to look for during this stage? So first is there's increased buyer interest. And then secondly, there's early stage infrastructure, and there are business developments around the area. So those are the signs to look out for during the recovery stage. So think of this like spring, the season spring. So everything is just starting to bloom. So that's the first phase or the first season. The next season or the next phase is what we call expansion phase or the boom phase. So what happens during this phase? Number one, the market is growing fast. So in this case, the prices are already rising and the demand is high and the properties are already selling out quickly. There's a large amount of sales volume here. So developers are building new projects and the businesses are already starting to move in. And what are the signs to look for when or during the expansion phase? Very obvious, there will be a lot of new construction, left and right. And properties are selling fast and at higher prices compared to the previous phase or the previous stage. So if you look at it, we put an analogy, this would be summer, right? Why? Because everything is now growing, everything is now thriving, everything is now in full swing. So it's like summer. Everyone's happy in summer because it's summer.
Summer holidays.
Summer holidays, exactly. And then we have the third phase or what we call the peak or the top. So what happens after the summer or what happens after the boom? Well, number one, the market reaches its highest point. That's why it's called the peak. And then the prices here, you would notice that they are at their maximum. Okay, so the competition among buyers would be intense and it becomes so hard to find good deals because again, the prices are at their maximum. So some buyers will overpay or some may overpay during this period, during this phase. So what are the signs to look for during the peak? Number one, the properties have already become overpriced. It's too much. Okay, and then you would notice that there will be fewer new developments because the cost in that area would be too high. So it's kind of like late summer. It's late summer. Why? Things are good. Summer is good, but it's starting to plateau. And then we have our last stage or last phase. It's called the correction phase or the cool down. So what happens during this phase? If things start to plateau, then it's getting ready to cool down. So the market cools off. The demand slows down, the prices are dropping, and the properties during this phase, they're already taking longer to sell. And over-leveraged investors, they struggle to hold on to their assets. So what are the signs to look out for to see if a certain area is already at its correction phase? There are price reductions. There will be discounts. Because the demand slows down, the prices are dropping, right? And there are higher vacancy rates. So this is like fall or winter, if we put this into analogy, because the market is already resetting in this phase. It's resetting and it's resting. It's resting. And after rest, of course, it's getting ready for the next cycle, has the energy that it needs for the next cycle. Now, we can't give you the exact time on how long each of these cycles will last, but typically they will last for years. And also each location it's going to be different. because it varies based on the economic conditions and the other factors in the area. Let's bring back our favorite example all throughout this series and this podcast. It's going to be BGC, right? The New York and the Tokyo and the Dubai of the Philippines. So let's apply the real estate market cycle here. So BGC before it was BGC. So at the recovery phase, so the area was undervalued. It was like dirt, right? It was just flat, not much construction, not much building, not many people saw its potential, but it was ripe for investment. The second phase was when BGC gained popularity. That's the expansion phase. So it started becoming a hotspot. So demand increased and property values began to rise and more people wanted to go in because again, property values are going high. There's a lot of activity, market activity that's happening in this phase. And then BGC as a hotspot. The third phase. So this is when properties were being developed left and right, and everyone wanted a piece of the action, leading to an oversupply and peak prices of properties. And then lastly, BGC becoming overvalued or the correction phase. So people start thinking that it's extremely overvalued in BGC, which is something we're starting to see now. It's at its correction phase and the demand begins to drop. We always talk about BGC because it's such a good example. It's a perfect example of what a hotspot life cycle is. Because if we bought BGC 20 years, 30 years ago, back when it was just during its recovery phase or early in the expansion phase, before it was a hotspot, we would be millionaires by now.
We'd be so rich.
There is, yeah, I mean, the value would be so rich, like the prices of properties in BGC, millions and millions of pesos, right? But take, for example, we just brought recently, let's say 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we might be thinking by now, oh my gosh, what have we done?
Yeah.
Why did we buy? Right? So that's probably because it's too late. We would have bought too late if we bought 2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So
I think
Go ahead.
it's important to mention though that it depends on your portfolio, right? So obviously we're saying BGC is a little too late, but again, you should always look at what we're teaching you, what anyone's teaching you through the lens, what does your portfolio need right now?
Contextual.
And maybe like you might be in a position where you have really good foundational properties that are cash flow positive, that have appreciated, and now you just want something that is a little bit more stable in a more stable market, then BGC might be for you. So make sure
Right.
that, you know, when you're learning these concepts from us, please understand it from and think about it from your own portfolio perspective and what your strategy is.
Right. It's always contextual and it's always based on what your portfolio needs. All right. So going back, but even though BGC is at its correction phase already, we have to remember these phases are recurrent. It's recurrent, it's a cycle. So just because an area enters a recession, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the road. So once BGC experiences its recession phase, it'll likely move back to its recovery phase. It's going to start all over again. And maybe everyone undervalues BGC and momentum slows down or major infrastructure developments come to play, changing its cycle, and it'll experience the 4 phases all over again. So it's going to keep going on. And it's like a wheel, right? Or the 4 seasons. But yeah, which brings us to our second principle. Justin?
It's important to note as well with when it comes to real estate, it's generally an upward trend. So you can sort of imagine real estate. So I think a lot of people think real estate's like up and down, but real estate is more like a staircase. So the sideway movement is more when there's very little growth, but then generally there might be a little dip, but then it will go up. So you have to remember that real estate has an upward trend generally, of course. I'm not talking, there are obviously some outliers to that. I'm sure a lot of people might be thinking of an outlier, but in general terms, real estate goes through an upward trend. Now, the reason why we're talking about market cycles and why it correlates to hotspots is because we don't want to come in when it's a hotspot. What we want to come into is the pre-hotspot, because that's where all the money is made, is before it's a hotspot. So again, if you think about it from the BGC example, like Kane was saying, if you got in 2004 before BGC was nothing and you held on to it up until now, oh God, you have a very, very good asset. But in comparison, if you bought it recently, well, it's not that great. So that's why we're teaching about market cycles. So that's the second concept that we're trying to teach in this pre-hotspot video, is you want to sort of, I guess you could say, time the market where you're getting in either pre-hotspot, or you could also get in early hotspot. You don't want to go in when it's already in that later stage, when it's correcting or the peak, because you're just not going to get the value that you would if you went pre-hotspot. If you think about it, if you buy pre-hotspot, you're going to get two major things. Number one, you're going to get a greater capital growth. And number two, your rental yield is going to be higher. And let me give an example of why that's the case, right? No, actually, before that, let me explain to you what capital growth is for our new real estate investors. So capital growth refers to the appreciation of a property over time. So meaning if your property is worth 100,000 when you bought it, and then it increased by 100 to 150, you have 50,000 in capital growth. And then when I talk about rental yield, it is the return on investment from rental income relative to the purchase price. So if you were to do a mathematical formula, it would be like your rental yield and then your property value. Now, really, we're talking about gross rental yield, right? And rental yield basically means how much you're earning compared to how much the property costs. Now, I'm going to give an example of why it's so important to buy pre-hotspot. So let's say you bought a property at 100,000, and the first year you're earning 6,000 in rental income. So you're earning a 6% rental yield, right? That's the first year you bought it. Now let's fast forward to year 3. Now, again, I'm making these numbers up just for a hypothetical example. So don't quote me or think that this is a real life example. So now let's say that same property, year 3, increased to 150. So your equity increased by 50,000, and now you're earning 7,000. So you're earning a 7% rental yield. And I'm sure a lot of people are like, wait, that math ain't mathing. That's because if you follow my formula, you're like, well, a property that's worth 150,000 and you're earning a 7% yield, you should be earning 10,500, right? No, because your yield is really frozen based on your purchase price. And the only time that unfreezes if you choose to release the equity, increase the debt on the home. And hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, comment down below. We'll actually make a whole video on it because it's a very interesting topic. Anyway, so same property. Now let's fast forward to year 5. So it's 200K. Now it's worth 200K. So it's increased by 100,000 in equity. And now you're earning 10,000 per year. So 10% yield, right? So imagine that another person who bought at year 3 instead of at year 1. You bought a property at year 3 where the houses were worth 150,000 instead of 100,000. So by year 5, what happens if you bought in year 3 is that you only have 50,000 in equity, and instead of 10% yield, your yield is 6.67%. So a 2-year difference in timing wise can cost you so much, is basically what I'm trying to state. And we see that the real life example is BGC, where people who bought early and prices were cheaper in 2004, they had a higher return in appreciation and also a higher yield than people who are buying right now. So that is the power timing the market. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, whoa, it's really hard to time the market, or it's nearly impossible to time the market. I agree. It's really hard to time the market if you're timing it at the start and at the end. The thing is, and with real estate cycles, is that it lasts years. So it's not like BGC, for example, became a hotspot overnight. No, it took time to warm up. So it's impossible to time when BGC started becoming BGC, but it's not impossible to time when it started to heat up, basically. So, and then it's not impossible to time it when it's too hot, but it is impossible to time it when BGC will stop being a hotspot and go into that recession phase, right? So it's all about like understanding the warm up and then seeing that warm up, and that's when you time it, right? Not about timing the start and the end. Sorry, go.
Sorry, I was just going to say that kind of brings us into our third core concept, which is the idea that each hotspot, it has their own degree of hotness. So like it's kind of a range. You know, not every hotspot is going to act in the same way. They're not going to reach the same figures. There's no definitive, you know, number that people need to look out for. It's recognizing the signs and recognizing that a hotspot can go up and down as well, but eventually it will always go up, if that makes sense. It's like finding that median average. So signs that a market is heating up, for example, might be that it's all over the news. There might be rapid price increases. There might be really high buyer demand. Properties might be selling faster than ever before. The key is you need to spot that market before it becomes saturated. Now, that's not to say that by the time a property is a hotspot, it's too late. And it's not to say that you shouldn't buy there, but it's to say if you want to take advantage and if you want to get the most bang for your buck and you want to get the most rental yield, buying earlier is better.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, which again also brings us to our next topic about getting out early. So a lot of people might think that, you know, I want to get in and I want to make quick profit, like really fast, and then get out. But honestly, that's not always the best strategy, especially in real estate, because in real estate investing, it's the long game.
It
right?
is, yeah.
There's value in riding the market cycles that we just discussed. So take, for example, if we invest at the right entry point before a market becomes a hotspot, we can ride the growth upward. So just to give you an example, let's say we make a 30% gain, but then the market cools off and then it corrects itself and then it drops by 10%. We're going to be left with 20% overall gain. We're still left with a 20% gain. So the takeaway is it's worth sticking around and riding the cycles.
Yeah, definitely.
Because why? The long game brings the biggest gains in real estate. So the biggest profits come from playing the long game. You won't necessarily milk the cow in real estate if you don't do it in the long term. You don't milk it properly.
I'm not sure I've ever heard that phrase before.
That was a new one for me as well. Okay, we understand. We get it.
We get the point.
Yeah, for sure. And one more thing that I want to bring up in relation to playing the long run is that cash flow positive properties are crucial to keep properties for the long run. So whenever you do look for properties, you need to look for two characteristics on that property. So that's number one, you need to look for a property that is cash flow positive, which means that it puts money in your pocket each month after expenses, because there will be expenses, there will be mortgage that you have to pay. So your income or your rental income has to be more than that. If your rental income is more than your expenses, then it's cash flow positive. And then second thing that you have to look for is that it has high growth potential, which means that it's likely to appreciate in value over time. So why am I saying this? Why does this matter? So number one, even if the market dip, if you have a cash flow positive property, it allows you to, number one, hold on to it stress-free. It's stress-free. If the market goes down and you have a cash flow positive property, you're still making money out of it, right? After expenses. That's number one. And then number two, you can ride out the market fluctuations without financial strain.
Mm-hmm.
So take, for example, if the market corrects itself, even if the value goes down, you don't have to think about, oh my gosh, where am I going to get my money? No, if your property is cash flow positive and it has high growth potential, which means that it's likely to grow over time, it allows you to be stress free. You don't have to be strained financially.
Yeah. I
Right?
think that there's like, if you're buying a property and it's not bringing you in cash flow, especially really early on in your portfolio when you need that cash flow to help you get to your second property, it was probably a bad purchase.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it depends. I think it depends on your portfolio. Again, if you're, and we're going to do a big episode on this because it's so important to understand what your portfolio needs, because a lot of people will say cash flow is king. Cash flow is king. Well, if you have a lot of cash flow, do you know what you don't need? Cash flow. Because if you have a lot of cash flow and no capital to buy your next property, well, you're stuck. Your portfolio is stuck. So it depends. You generally want to buy based on what current resources you are lacking. So generally there are three resources that you're thinking about if you're a property investor. Number one is the capital. So how much money in the bank do you have to purchase a property? Number two is cash flow. And number three is your borrowing capacity. So how much money a bank will give you. And if you don't understand what resources you're lacking, that is truly what's going to stop you from buying multiple properties and getting to your investment goals. So it very much depends on what your portfolio is missing and what you need to do at the moment to get to your goals. So it's very dependent. I just wanted one more thing about cash flow that it's important though, is because like you don't know what could happen to you. You could lose your job, you could get injured, you could have an emergency. And if your property isn't bringing in money or at least paying for itself, like, you're just not prepared enough for those situations. So it's very important to make sure that you're buying at least cash flow positive properties. Now that, again, I think that's a really good foundational concept, but it could mean that you're giving up certain things based on your portfolio. And by that, I mean, we're saying, hey, make sure it's cash flow. But if your portfolio needs a lot of capital, maybe you can buy a property that has less cash flow, but high growth opportunity versus maybe because the other opportunity you might have is like high cash flow, low capital growth, right? So in that opportunity, your portfolio probably needs the property with the lower cash flow, but it's still positive. So I'm not saying if you need capital growth that you don't go for cash flow positive properties. No, I'm saying maybe lower yields and then higher capital. But again, this whole topic deserves another episode. So I'm going to stop here. But just make sure that you're buying based on your portfolio.
Always keep in mind that everything is contextual. There might be general tips on situations, but again, everything is conceptual when it comes to investing, most especially in the real estate market. Going back, the key here is not getting in and getting out, right? The key here is number one, understanding the opportunity, your opportunity cost, and you can do that by analyzing which locations are too hot and which locations that are not hot. And then at the same time, the key here is maximizing your returns by timing your entry to the market correctly. You don't have to time it perfectly because not everyone can do that. It's very, very hard to do that. But you can time it correctly. And then lastly, the last key here is that you're reducing risk. And this goes with our next concept that Georgina will discuss. Go ahead, Georgina.
Yes, our next concept is that hotspots have core drivers. Now, a core driver is a key factor or an element that contributes significantly to the growth and development of the real estate market, and it ultimately turns a location into a hotspot. So these are the underlying forces that create demand, attract investment, and increase property values in a specific area. Now, there are about 12 core drivers. And like I said earlier, in each episode after this, we'll reveal them 4 at a time just to keep things a bit exciting. And because there's so much to talk about as well, we couldn't possibly cover them all in one episode. So next episode, the core drive: infrastructure, lifestyle features, job nodes, and developer money. So when you talk about core drivers, all 12 of them, or any combination of 12 of them, can transform a location into a hotspot. To reduce risk, you should look for hotspots with at least 3, preferably 4 core drivers. Hotspots work together to create a strong indicator of whether a location is on the rise or whether it's already a hotspot. And if it's already a hotspot, you might need to second guess investing there, right? We've learned about that with the cycles earlier with Kane. So the more drivers you have, the better chances you have of creating a good investment. But it is rare, admittedly, for a location to have all 12 core drivers. But the more drivers you have, the better the chances are of an area heating up and turning into a hotspot. So if the location has all 4, or has at least 4 core drivers, then they're working together, they're complementing each other, and there's probably a really good chance that it's going to be a great investment for you. So for example, like I mentioned before, with the infrastructure, lifestyle features, job nodes, and developer money, if we had a location with all 4 of those, this is what it might look like. Infrastructure improvements like new roads or public transport make the area more accessible. More accessibility attracts developers to invest money into new projects. New developments create job opportunities or job nodes, which is really good for businesses. And as more people work and live in that area, lifestyle features like parks, shopping centers, and entertainment venues also start to pop up. So these are 4 elements that come together and create a synergy that can propel a location into becoming the next big thing, aka a hotspot. So understanding and identifying these core drivers in a location is really crucial for your investment strategy. And it's what's going to help you spot potential hotspots before everybody else does.
Just before we end, I think it's important to note about, we mentioned that you should be looking for 3 or 4 core drivers, and that's not a definitive thing. But we mentioned earlier that investment is all about reducing risk, right? And the more core drivers you have, you reduce your risk, because let's say, for example, with infrastructure, as we mentioned, you learn that there's a new airport that's going to be built, and then you go and buy because you're like, new airport, everyone's going to come in. Awesome. That means the property prices are going to increase, easier to get there. Like, great. And then you learn the politician was lying, and then the new airport isn't going to be built, or is going to be built 40 years later than what you thought. And now what happens? Now you have invested in a place that has nothing else going for it aside from that one core driver. Investing in a place with multiple core drivers, like we said, 3 or 4 at least, allows you to mitigate your risk, because if you're wrong on one of those core drivers, at the very least you have the other core drivers to back yourself on investing in that location. So that's why we say, hey, at least 3 or 4, and the more the ideal. I don't think we've ever seen a property that has all 12, but the more the better, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
One of the best things you can do before you start investing is, and really researching on properties, is to figure out what your budget is. But unfortunately, here in the Philippines, that can be very hard, because banks don't do what you call a pre-approval. And, for people in Australia and America that understand this, that a bank in those countries will tell you, hey, this is exactly how much money I'm going to give you. And what that does is give you a whole lot of confidence that, hey, if I'm purchasing a property, I already know that a bank will give me this. But unfortunately, they don't do that. They give you more of a rough estimate. And that's why, we're offering a free borrowing power consultation, where we will do a little bit more of an accurate estimation based on multiple banks, not just one, what your potential budget is here in the Philippines if you were to purchase. We also will give you credible real estate agents to work with, which is super important because I know a lot of people are scared to invest in the Philippines because of scams. Well, we want to help with that by actually connecting you with more credible real estate agents that we have met and talked with and work with. So please sign up if you're ready to invest here in the Philippines. Sign up to our free borrowing power consultation. A link will be below in the description for you to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and if you're not quite ready to invest yet, but you're still interested, you think all this stuff sounds really interesting to you, make sure you join our real estate community group. You'll gain access to exclusive resources that can help you make better strategic decisions. You'll be surrounded by like-minded people who are also interested in investing. You can talk to them. You can also talk to us if you want to, if you have questions. Altogether, we're all working to build wealth and strive for financial freedom. So join the group. It's free as well as the borrowing power consultation.
Just don't forget, number 1, sign up for our free borrowing consultation. And number 2, join our real estate community and talk to us and talk to people that have the same mindset as you. So now that we've talked about the core concepts, it's time to dive into the core drivers in our next 3 episodes. So please stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss your chance to uncover the secrets to finding hotspots. That is all. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. And I hope you have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.